Here's hoping the Inflation Reduction Act doesn't pass. Sinema's demands on carried interest taxes imperil Manchin deal. Sinema wants to keep private equity tax break Manchin dislikes. Sinema's tax change would eat into Manchin's deficit reduction. Senator Kyrsten Sinema is privately seeking changes to the party's tax, health, and climate bill, but accommodating her threatens the delicate balance that just last week convinced Senator Joe Manchin to endorse the legislation. Manchin and Sinema were lead negotiators on last year's $550 billion bipartisan infrastructure bill, and together have thwarted attempts by fellow Democrats to enact many of President Joe Biden's priorities. It's basically a combination Green New Deal and Build Back Better, and it just has a different name now. It's the Inflation Reduction Act. Now, as Democrats prepare to vote on whittled-down versions of Biden's economic plan, they are on a collision course over which taxes to raise and how much to cut the deficit. Manchin, a West Virginia Democrat, released a bill last week with a handful of tax increases on private equity and corporations, investments in energy incentives, and drug pricing deal. Sinema, an Arizona Democrat who has publicly stayed silent on the bill, wasn't involved in those negotiations, and her demands have the potential to sink the bill in the Senate 50-50. Sinema is looking to cut a provision that would narrow a tax break for private equity known as carried interest, according to people familiar with the matter. Eliminating that preference for money managers has been a key priority for Manchin for years, though he said he is open to hearing the economic reasoning for retaining the tax break. Sinema, who has been at the center of talks on other major legislation, was blindsided by the Manchin-Schumer deal. Manchin told reporters that he kept Sinema and others out of the loop because the deal could have gone sideways at any moment and he didn't want to get people's hopes up. He said that no one should view the surprise deal as some kind of coup against them. Some Democrats, including Manchin, expressed outrage at the idea of keeping the carried interest break as it is, which benefits the very wealthy. Why shouldn't you get the same rate he gets just because you're managing the money with no capital? Manchin told reporters at the Capitol late Wednesday, if someone can explain it differently, how it really stimulates the market and makes things work, I'm happy to understand. Virginia Democrat Senator Tim Kaine told reporters he is insisting that he's insisting that it stay in the deal. Others are questioning why Sinema is going to bat for private equity. Cutting the carried interest provision from the bill, which the Congressional Budget Office estimates raises $13 billion, wouldn't derail most of the $739 billion in revenue expected to be raised, and probably isn't a deal breaker. But there are other big landmines. I don't know where they come up with that figure because it's, $739 billion in revenue. If you're spending a whole bunch of money, that's not $739 billion in revenue, and this gets it closer to being a wash, even with the Democrats' fake idea of how taxes and stuff are going to work in those cases. Believe it that if these corporations and stuff are charged these higher tax rates, they're also going to seek to get relief by getting freebies and stuff like that from the government to place their business in a certain location, all that other kind of stuff. So they will not pay the amount of tax that they're expecting to get here. And worse yet, you'll probably cause them to close some doors and everything else like that. So they'll make less money and they'll pay less tax. They'll find some other way to shelter it, or they just move out of the country altogether and put their business in, say, Mexico. Sinema also wants to scale back a 15% minimum tax on a corporation's financial statements profits, which is the largest revenue raiser in the Manchin-approved deal. Narrowing that tax hike enough to gain Sinema support would likely mean foregoing roughly $100 billion of the projected $313 billion that the provision raises. Any changes to the corporate minimum tax would have wider ripple effects and could cause the bill to run afoul of the Senate's rules for the fast-track budget reconciliation process, which Democrats are using to pass the bill on a party line vote. They're going around so that they don't require the 60 votes to pass it. It's the same old thing. We'll talk about some of the other bills and stuff here soon, but one of the things that they do is they attach money to something, and then what the actual cost is and everything else like that is figured out later, and then they pass it under these, hokey reconciliation process where it's like, well, we don't have to have as many votes to pass this, and we'll worry about the money and stuff. We'll worry about that later. Democrats are using to pass the bill in a party line vote. Democrats are required to decrease the deficit in the bill by at least $1 billion, though Manchin wants much bigger reductions. Sinema's concerns may be bolstered by a Congressional Budget Office analysis released Thursday in response to questions by Republican Senator Lindsey Graham. CBO said that the corporate minimum tax would provide a disincentive for investment for business by limiting the value of certain tax breaks, and it found that the bill has little to no effect on inflation in 2022 and 2023. Actually, I think they found in 2023 that's when it'll start going up. I know there's going to be an increase in taxes in the future out there for less than $400,000 a year people, like Joe Biden. Joe Biden flat outright promised they wouldn't be raising taxes on those people. But hey, inflation is a tax that we all pay and hurts the little people more, so nobody cares about that, right? So if these companies start getting taxed more, what do? They pass the costs on to the consumer. So a tax raise on them is a tax raise on us. On the positive side for Democrats, CBO said it is not yet clear the U.S. is in a recession. Yeah, technical definitions, right? Also, earlier this week, the nonpartisan scorekeeper for Congress estimated that the bill cuts the deficit by $102 billion over a decade. Changing the corporate minimum tax to meet Sinema's needs would consume much or all of the deficit reduction in the bill. It's unclear whether Manchin could accept less money to curb the deficit in exchange for Sinema's support. He said Wednesday he hasn't yet had detailed discussions about changing the corporate levy. Resolving these differences could delay the vote on the bill, which Majority Leader Chuck Schumer has said he wants to hold in the coming days. The timing of the deal announcement came just hours after the Senate passed a $52 billion semiconductor measure. The CHIPS bill required Republican cooperation, which only came forward after Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell came to believe that any tax and climate deal with Manchin was dead. Sinema, along with Indiana Republican Todd Young, led a whip operation to get the CHIPS bill through the Senate. The deal announcement left her in an awkward position with Republicans. Here's hoping that she just outright says no.